Well, I mean, look, the Fed exists to deal with interest rates more or less, right, to keep inflation and unemployment in check simultaneously. Now, that's actually a pretty difficult thing to do, and you're going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul quite a lot of the time, right? There's going to be a fundamental friction, a tension between those two goals. And for years, they did a pretty good job, and we kept borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. And sooner or later, it gets a little more difficult to keep inflation under control when the government keeps taxing and spending at levels far beyond its level of competence. And that's what's happened now. So I don't think Anthony, my co-host on Words and Numbers, says that there's likely to be a new normal in terms of inflation, that for decades, for maybe a decade, we had 2% inflation. That was the Fed's goal. It met that goal year after year, and things were pretty good. And he says the new normal is going to be somewhere well north of 2, maybe even all the way up to 5% in a worst-case scenario, but probably 3.5 to 4. And these numbers sound very small, but they are incredibly large.
I'm Max Borders, your host, and today I've got James Harrigan. He's what you might call an old friend, and having friends in low places means you get to have your very first podcast with a good friend.
My calendar was wide open, Max, wide open.
James is co-host with Anthony Davies of the podcast Words and Numbers. He also happens to be a co-author of the book Cooperation and Coercion with the same fellow. I want to welcome you.
Thank you. Happy to be welcomed.
Yeah, it's great. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I think so.
And I tell you, we often said in our intellectual journey together, if you want to call it that, more like curmudgeonly bitch sessions or whatever, that we should really be recording this because it would be a great podcast. So we're finally getting to do it.
And I will be curmudgeonly. True to type.
Well, speaking of being a curmudgeon, and it's really quite welcome at this point in time, let's begin with the medium to long-term prospects for the global economy.
Oh, God.
We can start right here at home.
You just want to throw that trifling matter out first.
Yeah, let's just talk about, where things are right now. Everything's peachy. We got low unemployment, right? We've got low inflation. Well, relatively low. It's
relatively low.
And
inflation's better.
Yeah, what Milton Friedman would call, let's see, what did he call it? Frictional unemployment. It's around that level. But everything's not so peachy. There's some structural problems that can make for, I guess we could call, storm clouds on the horizon. Am I right about that? What do you think?
I think there are always storm clouds on the horizon when you're dealing with human beings, right? Human beings are a difficult and tricky lot, and they want stupid, destructive things more often than they don't. And, we stress the need for self-government, popular government, and sooner or later, the people get pretty much what they ask for. So you see the built-in tension right there, right? And look, I think morally, you have to have some form of self-government. I think it's the only moral answer to the question of the form, ultimately, of government. And you could have something that's more democratic or less democratic, and I'm on the less democratic side, along with the American founders, but that doesn't mean I'm anti-democratic. It just means less so. Because the more democratic things get, the harder they are to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I think, you turn on your TV right now and take a look at what's going on both at home and abroad. And I think it's pretty easy to conclude things are kind of difficult to deal with right now.
Yeah, it's not just that things are difficult to deal with. I mean, we could talk about the tariff regime, and that could shake out in a way that's not so destructive. But there are issues around the national debt and unfunded liabilities into the future that frighten me to no end.
They
and the
should.
antics of the Federal Reserve. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, look, the Fed exists to deal with interest rates more or less, right? To keep inflation and unemployment in check simultaneously. Now that's actually a pretty difficult thing to do, and you're going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul quite a lot of the time, right? There's going to be a fundamental friction, a tension between those two goals. And for years, they did a pretty good job. And we kept borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. And, sooner or later, it gets a little more difficult to keep inflation under control when the government keeps taxing and spending at levels far beyond its level of competence. And that's what's happened now. So I don't think Anthony, my co-host on Words and Numbers, says that there's likely to be a new normal in terms of inflation, that for decades, for maybe a decade, we had 2% inflation. That was the Fed's goal. It met that goal year after year, and things were pretty good. And he says the new normal is going to be somewhere well north of 2, maybe even all the way up to 5% in a worst case scenario, but probably 3.5 to 4. And these numbers sound very small, but they are incredibly large. Incredibly large when you look at what it really means. And I'll give you a real world example. I bought my house 6 years ago, and I got a 4.1% mortgage. Not bad. And then a year and a half later, I refinanced it to a 2.8% mortgage. Wow. If I went out to buy the same house today, I would get about a 7.2% mortgage. I can't buy the house at 7.2 because it makes the payments such that I can't afford them. And there's your real world example of what a couple of points means.
This is why people are talking about a whole generation, maybe two, Gen Z and the millennials are struggling so much to really have this sort of traditional American lifestyle with being able to afford a home and all like that. They're overextending themselves if they can get a mortgage at all. And then there's this personal debt shadow that looms over it. At least we don't have adjustable rates anymore. But if we have some sort of economic problem where all of a sudden employment starts to go off the reservation, in other words, there just are fewer jobs and people can't make their obligations, then we're starting to have a cascading effect. Is that
it's 2008
likely?
all over again.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to happen.
But can they bail us out? The only way to do would be just to inflate us out of it, right? So we're looking at either like a Japanese lost decade, or are we looking at Argentina life?
I think in the end, what's really going to happen, and I've said this before, and people call me crazy, and I'm fine with it. I think this, over time, signals the end of the United States as a political unit. I don't think we can withstand the pressure that's going to come when our currency finally collapses. And it will, because that's what happens when you keep spending more than you have. Sooner or later, the interest expense on the budget costs more than you can take in simply. And your currency just falls to pieces. It's kind of like in Venezuela right now, where they don't count the money when you go to the store, they weigh it. Right? Because who's got time to count that much inflated currency?
You're just taking wheelbarrows full of money to the store to buy a loaf of bread.
Yep, kind of like the pictures in the wake of World War II in Germany and Italy, where housewives would literally bring a wheelbarrow full of money to go buy a loaf of bread. People in Germany were using Reichmarks as wallpaper. People in Venezuela right now, you can go on Etsy and buy a purse made out of their currency. The purse is worth more than the currency that makes it, right? And Americans and people in the West more broadly think, oh, well, that will never happen here. Why the hell not? Rome fell. Regimes fall. There's no such thing as a perpetual regime. They come and they go. And the United States will someday in the future fall apart. This is the most likely reason why. There are other reasons that maybe, but this is really the likeliest of all reasons by orders of magnitude.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I can go on a little bit more about this, and it's not necessarily a terrible thing because when, in the wake of World War II, Europe was in ruins. Well, if we fell apart because of a currency collapse, we wouldn't be lying in ruins. We just wouldn't have currency, and the government would have fallen apart. Um, and if you look at the FEMA map, everybody talks about FEMA all the time in negative ways, mostly. But if you look at the FEMA map across the United States, it divides the country into 10 zones for, relief. And those zones make perfect sense, both culturally and geographically. The
I've
United
seen a map.
States,
Yeah, I've seen a map of all of the college football divisions, SEC and Big 12 and so on. I thought those made pretty good divisions, but maybe your FEMA map is better. But maybe this is something that we should wish for then.
well, there are billionaires who are certainly wishing for it. They're preparing for it. They're trying to push it along. I think this is well past the level of conspiracy theory at this point. I think people know that this is really their goal in a lot of ways. I wouldn't push for it simply because those 2 or 3 years after it happens are going to be brutal.
Yeah.
They're going to be absolutely brutal. Now, the American industrial complex, the productive capacity of the country, or the zones, or whatever, is going to be exactly what it was the day before it all fell apart. But it will fall into disuse, and we'll have to reignite it with a currency, right? You see all the difficulties that would come before we could get back to the standard of living we once had. And I think we'd have 2 or 3 years of immense pain, probably a decade, even two, where we didn't quite get back to where we were. And then after that, we'd probably be much better off.
Let's think about this in terms of, okay, we're on the tines of a fork, okay? And on one tine of, well, there are multiple actually forks in the road, but let's just say one of those is do exactly what we're doing, which is what the political class thinks we should do, clearly, after the big steaming turd of beautiful bill.
The big, beautiful bill.
Yep. Yeah. And that basically said, we don't care about the national debt and what it threatens in terms of inflation or anything else, which that is political incentives 101, means always turn to debt and don't worry about it. Kick the can into the future. But what you've told us, and I believe you, is that we cannot forever kick the can into the future. The Japanese are not going to be able to do it.
Nope.
And clearly there are countries that have experienced collapse, but there are some countries that have pulled back from the brink. I'm thinking of New Zealand in the early 80s. I think it was 83. I'm thinking of Ireland before the Irish Tiger in 1990. They were really close to insolvency. I'm thinking about Argentina 2 years ago when Javier Milei was elected. Would that we could have a Milei, right? Like
that'd be great. That'd be great.
Would that work, or is our system just too unwieldy and different to be able to do that?
It would work because, I mean, look, you can't fight math, at least not forever, right? Math wins in the end. It's just that simple. Now, Javier Milei shows up to Argentina and sees a far worse condition than anything we've seen since the Great Depression, and maybe worse even than that, but I'll leave that to the economic historians to sort out. It's not relevant to our story here. If we could vote in people like that with policy aims like he brought to Argentina, things could turn around rather quickly.
What kind of things that he's done, if you know for sure, just a couple, could we do here that could right the ship? I mean, one thing is to just stop spending growth, right? No more beautiful bills.
That would be incredibly helpful, right? Don't spend money you don't have. It's kind of like what your mother said to you when you were a young Max Borders. Don't buy things you can't afford. That's really good advice for individuals and for nations. But the problem is that politicians get elected by giving the people what they want, not
Which
what
is
they
goodies.
need.
Which is goodies and tanks.
That's right. Goodies, tanks, shiny objects of all kinds, Obama phones. I mean, there's a million different idiotic things that people have wanted and have gotten from the government. And look, Millet got in and he said, this is untenable. If we keep walking down this road, there's literally nothing we're ever going to be able to do to recapture any form of fiscal sanity. And he got elected, and that was a miracle, right? Did anybody really see that coming? I sure didn't. I mean, look, I'm not an Argentine politics expert, but I never thought a libertarian would get elected to anything.
Well, and the stellar performance of the Argentine economy is just, it is proof in the pudding for everybody who said talked shit about market fundamentalism or free market fundamentalism. Remember, that was a term of derision for years.
Yeah.
But we can go back to Germany post-war, and of course we had the Marshall Plan, which the Keynesians all say, oh, it was because of the Keynesian, dollar drop after the war that the Germans had this tiger economy after the war. But they had also good institutions, and they were fiscally austere and conservative. And to the extent that they used the Marshall Plan investments, it was to rebuild their infrastructure. And after that, in the 60s and 70s, they were just taken off.
And that they were disallowed from spending too terribly much on their military, which, had led to a couple of problems in the previous decades. Didn't hurt, right? It didn't hurt. Now, I don't want to plant false hope anywhere. If we cut military spending to zero in America, and I mean literally zero in America, we still wouldn't be close to balancing the budget.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the scope of our problem. There's no easy
people are always
answer.
saying we can't do anything with the entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Yeah, you have to.
You have to.
You really don't have a choice.
So sooner or later, this is the calculus a politician has to involve himself with. Can I cut Social Security and still get reelected?
Right.
If the answer to that question is no, Social Security will never be cut.
And if Social Security is never cut and we drive ourselves into a fiscal ditch, we become insolvent or what have you, then it's just a matter of inflation. Then we start looking more and more every day like Argentina, correct?
That's
Argentina,
like Venezuela.
Well,
more likely.
Like
Argentina. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That would be my diagnosis.
So the conditions around Millet, because one could argue, I think, with Roger Nomics in New Zealand in the early 80s, they went through a similar problem of we're gonna become insolvent, we're gonna go bust, we've got to do something, and it was a socialist government who realized that austerity, they had no choice but to implement austerity measures. Yeah. And for our listeners who don't like economic big words like that, it just means slow the spending, stop the spending, privatize things that shouldn't be nationalized. That's the kind of thing.
Tighten your belt and cut it out.
And the socialists and the fiscal leftists in New Zealand knew they had to do that. They had no other choice. So it was like, it doesn't matter whether it's Millet or not. At some point, somebody's got to come in and do just what your mama told you, or what you said my mama told me, and she did.
Yeah, you think about Margaret Thatcher at times like this, who said the problem with socialism is that you run out of other people's money. Right?
Yeah.
And look, if there's no money to socialize, all is lost. Well, what now? Well, good luck to you. And I'll remind, not you maybe, but to some of our listeners today, man's natural condition is pretty grim, right? We belong in caves. We worked ourselves to where we are now, to where I can sit here in Tucson, Arizona, in the middle of the desert in air-conditioned comfort with 5 supermarkets within 8 minutes of my house. These are miracles. These are not our natural condition.
Forgive this brief interruption, but I suspect you're here because you're disillusioned with legacy politics. If you're a creative, a builder, or an innovator, you might be ready to win funding. Through Human Respect Labs, you can get up to $30,000 to fund your next creative project. But not just any project. We're looking for 6 kinds of builders: video storytellers, community builders, writers, entrepreneurs, strategists, and innovators, any of which should be dedicated to human liberation. That means making government obsolete. Why? We know too much energy goes into politics, but not enough goes into real solutions. So if you're a freedom lover and you have a project idea that promotes peace, autonomy, and voluntary collaboration, we want to hear from you. Apply now at humanrespectlabs.org. That's humanrespectlabs.org. Criticize by creating.
Our natural condition.
Lavishly to regale this audience with your wisdom.
Yeah, well,
I'm just kidding. But
except for that, everything that we've said thus far has been very true. But you know, people lose sight of what our natural position in this world is. And if you can't remember that, you're probably far too optimistic about what you think we can achieve or what you think normal should be. And I think that's dangerous.
Yeah, it is. It's dangerous thinking. It's well, the starting point for the thinking I sometimes wonder is asking the question, why is a country poor, rather than why is country Y rich, right? So we tend to want to say, why are these sub-Saharan African countries poor? And there are some diagnostic answers that one could provide. But the better question is, what is it about those African countries that they lack? Or what is it about the rich countries that they possess? What is it that they're doing that's right in terms of their institutional substrate? Because we have gotten away from those basics, and I think you and I probably agree mostly about what those basics are. I'd say more or less.
That's
right. We continue to veer away slowly from those basics to try to have more and more economic interventionism on the part of whether it's on behalf of rich bankers who want to be bailed out, or private equity or whatever, that's probably coming, or both. People who want their student loans covered because we said, oh, take student loans. Everybody needs an education. Nobody needs to mow grass and learn how to do wiring in a house, right?
It's a public good.
It's a public good. Let's just shower it on everybody, and there'll be wonderful things that come out of it. What has happened is the personal debt has mounted. The national debt has certainly mounted. The only developed country that's worse than us is Japan, and they're hurting mightily. Europe is looking like it's going into a ditch as well. We've got global problems, 300 trillion around the world in collective debt, and yet we have politicians like those in New York, like the one in New York, who's about to get elected mayor, who thinks it's a wonderful thing to freeze prices on housing and create nationalized grocery stores.
What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? If you want city-owned grocery stores, you might as well say you don't want food on the shelves, because there won't be any. It's not going to happen, right? Sure, you'll be able to walk in and get this or that, but will you be able to walk in and find a super Walmart? No, you will not. You heard it here first, right? Rent control. If ever there was, if I could get rid of one pernicious policy, it would be rent control. Because who does it hurt? It hurts people at the absolute margin, right? Those people who teeter between being able to and not being able to afford a home. And when you control rent, allegedly to help them, you end up making more of them homeless than ever before. Unbelievable. And when is it that we decided as a people that what sounds good is great and evidence doesn't matter?
So the supply of housing stock in a city and relative to its demand has no bearing whatsoever on its price or someone's willingness to invest in more housing units in said city.
Crazy.
Let's just completely get rid of that idea, which we have mountains of empirical evidence to show.
Mountains. If there's one thing that literally every economist could agree on, it would be this.
Including
this
Paul
and
Krugman.
minimum wage.
Yeah.
Right, minimum wage is stupidity on ice. The minimum wage is zero. And it's the same set of circumstances, right? You price people out of the labor market just like you price them out of the housing market. Right? They can't compete to get a job with the skills they have because now the price of hourly labor has gone up so much that they're not worth it. I notice I didn't say they weren't worth something as human beings. I said they weren't worth something as hourly workers. The same way I'm not worth $5 million an hour to anyone, but, maybe in my own head. Some people are not worth $15 an hour. When you look at these living wage arguments, all you really see are people who have turned a blind eye to the weakest among us who should be getting the most support, but who end up getting exactly none. And I'll give you another real-world example. We moved to Arizona from Utah, and the minimum wage, much higher in Arizona. I think it's like $13.50 or some such thing. And all three of my children said, the way children do, I want a job. And they went out to look for jobs and couldn't find them. Why? Because at $13.50, all kinds of people entered back into the workforce who had exited. Retirees, stay-at-home moms, because it was just worth it given how much they could make. Who didn't get job training? Young people. The people who needed it the most.
Right. And this is the thing. We have an economy of almost complete interdependence. Yeah. In other words, we don't live in an era. I remember asking my great-grandmother one time, I said, what was it like to go through the Great Depression for you? And she said in her very country North Carolina accent, she said, well, we didn't know there was no depression going on at the time. We heard about it later on, And what that said to me was that she and her husband were farmers, and they basically created everything that they needed right there. They were agrarian people, and they were self-sufficient. They might go up to the, up to town, which would have been, 10 minutes drive in the old Dodge or whatever, or I remember a story of her going out and looking at the first Model T Ford, putting her skirt in like a Hindu faker, just like tuck her skirt in so she could run to see this machine. But in any case, that's just an indication of how far we've come since she was alive, as she was born, in terms of the utter plenty that we enjoy now. But we don't enjoy it equally now. But she said, and I'll come back to that, by the way, but she said, by way of a punchline, that they would just go up to town from time to time to get a little bit of sugar or to get some kind of goods that they couldn't produce on the farm, but otherwise they were self-sufficient. We don't live in that anymore.
Thank God.
Totally, well, thank God in a way, because who wants to work on a farm? I don't. But at the same time, when you start to have those pressures like you were describing earlier, where your unemployment rate starts to go up, companies start cutting back, there are all of these things that are economic convulsions that are cause people to adapt. If you have a steep drop off, this happened in Argentina. If you have austerity measures and you have a whole bunch of government employees who can no longer take a salary because we just have run out of money, then you've got an army of unemployed, and they're all out there picketing and screaming and whatever, and they're just making demands. And of course, this happened in the 20th century a lot, and it caused a lot of revolutions and wars. However, there again, we can go the path of Zoran in New York, which is going to be appropriate the means of production. And oh, by the way, we're going to do it right this time.
Yeah, this time we'll get it right.
Yeah, or let's go the way of Javier Milei. But it seems like the generation Zoran, Z, is all about, basically just they love socialism again, and they think it's awesome.
It's worse. It's worse than that, Max. Cato had a fiscal policy survey 2025, so this is very recent numbers. 34% of Americans, not New Yorkers, Americans, look favorably upon not socialism, but communism.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Sweet Lord in heaven, how did we get here?
Let's give the devil his due, though, okay?
Let me back off on that. It's 18 to 29-year-olds. Right. Old people still know better.
Old people still know better. Okay. So they're sowing the seeds of their own destruction. And at the end, you and I might have to check out during a depression, but they're the ones who are going to reap that terrible ergot harvest. I
wouldn't move to New York City right now. No. I mean, look, I wouldn't move to New York City mostly ever. Not my favorite place in the world, but I understand why people like it. I would advise anybody not to move there now. And anybody who has the means to just pick up and leave, they're doing it.
Yeah.
The outflows from New York State and New York City are pronounced.
That's right. People are voting with their feet. And this is why I want to go back to the thing that you said earlier, just briefly, about maybe if we had a situation where the federal government collapses, they run out of money, they can't hold it all together, that breaking up into these jurisdictions, these multiple jurisdictions, so that we can more readily vote with our feet and we can have the dynamics of jurisdictional arbitrage would be a good thing in the end.
In the end, yeah, I think that's right. But the amount of suffering to get to that end would be pretty significant.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I could, with a good conscience, say I can't wait for that to happen.
Well, I don't want anybody to experience pain. I know that, but it requires trade-offs. It's sort of like, do we want 20 years of chemotherapy until finally somebody figures out that austerity is going to be necessary, and we live through 20 years of inflation, a kind of Pyrrhonism, Argentine style economy, or do we just have a real hard, painful event before the collapse that causes a turnaround, like a Malay type just has his head on straight or her head on straight like a Thatcher and comes in and rights the ship. We need that. We needed Trump or someone to be that, and we didn't get it, it looks like. So now it's a situation of, it looks like we're going to have to accept the 4 to 5% inflation like you're talking about. It looks like we're going to have to accept austerity on top of that and diminished economic performance through time. Is that better? Is that sort of listless malaise economy for 20 years better, or is it better to have 6 months of hell? I don't know.
I'd rather rip the Band-Aid off and just get it over with. But, that's my personality, I guess. Other people would prefer to just softly coast along. And look, we live really soft lives. We live good lives.
Yeah.
People don't want to take a backward step from that, and I don't blame them one bit. I don't want to lose the things that make my life worth living. And I would lose some of them if we return to austerity in some serious way. And that's just where we are. I mean, I say this often, Max. People get the government they deserve. And take a look at your entire adult lifetime.
I don't know
any point where you could be proud and say, well, yes, that was wonderful.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean, I think, you and I probably don't agree on, I'm certain we don't agree on this unless you've changed in the last few months. I tend to be what we might call an asymptotic anarchist, right? Which is, to the extent possible, we move into the future realistically toward a condition where there is no coercive apparatus of the state interceding in our affairs. Mm-hmm. You have some ideas about what needs to be. You're a kind of a minimal statist, I guess. Is that an appropriate way to talk about it?
I'm an absolute minarchist. I think government should be exactly as big as it needs to be and no bigger. And it really doesn't need to be all that big.
Yeah, and I think our only difference philosophically on that, and perhaps we can talk about this now, is to go up a level of abstraction to the idea of the nature of government. We've never, I sound like a communist. We've never tried XYZ, right? But I would like to see.
I would point out that you do sound like a communist.
Yeah, I would like to see more markets and governance, right?
Yeah, I would too. I would too. And look, I always, and I did this even in our book, Cooperation and Coercion, I start with Tom Paine on these matters, who in a lot of ways distilled the American mind of the revolutionary period, right? And he said, people have conflated government and society for years, and they are completely different things. Society is always a blessing. Government is always a necessary evil. Government is at best a necessary evil, he said. And I think all of that is correct. Society is absolutely a blessing. This is why you don't see hermits, right? Or ever meet people who did live that way. There's no such thing. There may be one or two in human history. There might be one or two around the world now, but we all live in various kinds of societies. Why? Because the blessings are unmistakable. It's unmistakable. Your life is better in groups than it ever could be alone. Government, on the other hand, that's some tricky business.
But wait. Our kids, well, not my kids, not yet anyway, but I would say our kids, in terms of people our age, have kids who've just gotten through college or entering college around that time, right? They're either millennials or they're Gen Z. And they're taking out $100,000, $200,000, sometimes $300,000 in debt to learn from people who tell them precisely the opposite. And then they agitate to have their student loans forgiven, but that's another matter.
And so as a result, we have the most well-educated barista class the world has ever known.
Well, why is it that they're not being taught what we definitely know? I mean, you can just contrast the countries that have this set of institutions and imagine what it's like to live in them. Look at the Economic Freedom Index. There are two of them. One is from the Fraser Institute in Canada. One is in the Heritage Foundation in the United States. And they basically say the same thing. It's pretty much all the same top 10, top 20, with some shuffling around based on the inputs and so on. But they intuitively track with our understanding that, yes, it's a hell of a lot better to live in Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Singapore, Hong Kong, Switzerland, and Ireland than it is to live in Angola, Cuba, Laos, Venezuela, and so on. Like, all those failed socialist experiments should be telling us, waving red flags, as it were, don't do this. Why? What the hell has happened to higher education, and why are they learning this?
The answer is far simpler than you might think. Saying this as a former professor, I was a professor for at least 20 years, maybe more. I've never counted them all up. I'm not anymore for any number of reasons, this among them. If you took all the professors and kind of put them in a room and just walked around and listened to what they were saying to each other, you would come very quickly to understand that, yes, they are all deep down socialists and communists. Why? Because they know deep in their hearts that in that system, they'd be in charge.
Yes.
And that is the simple, correct answer.
That rings true. They're elites. They know. They want to make the rules. They want to tell you what to do.
They're not going to be the ones out busting their asses in the fields, Max. They're not going to go mine the coal. They're going to tell other people to do those things.
Well, they're not going to do the good either. They're going to hold the opinion that other people, namely rich people, and soon the rich people would go away, so that would be everyone in common, except them, of course, because they're part of the intelligentsia and they need to have a special set aside, have to be the ones who take care of each other through centralized means. And this is a good segue to what I would call the problem of power. Okay? I see the problem of power as, you talked about a minimal state, right? And I talked about like the idea of more competition for certain kinds for governance services, and the extent to which you can provide those competitive dynamics, the more you're going to get arbitrage between and among providers of those services. So if something sucks in one jurisdiction, it's easier to go to the next. If something stinks in Europe, if something stinks in France, well, you can just hopefully go to Switzerland. Swiss probably won't let you in, but you get the idea. But with the problem of power in an imperial jurisdiction like the United States that takes over a lot of people and great swaths of territory, the cost of leaving the United States is pretty high, right? It's not to say we haven't had a good thing going relative to all of the rest of human history. You make a good point in that. And relative to the rest of the world, we're frankly still, we're still probably in the top 20 of the best performing economies in the world, although we're certainly nowhere near the top anymore.
I'm not going anywhere.
Right. We got families. We got, it's hard.
All kinds of things tie human beings to a place.
That's right. And they're not always economic.
Not always.
So we want to reform. We want to exercise our voice. We want to live in a self-governing republic. But we've got this problem, the problem of power, that prevents us from doing that. Tell us a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, about those dynamics.
Well,
why is power so intractable? Why is reform so difficult? What is it about? Because I want to push back a little bit about the idea that we get what we vote for.
No, I said we get what we deserve.
Okay, so help me parse that distinction then. What do you mean by the difference? Because I interpreted that as we get what we vote for, which is what we deserve.
I would point out that there's a number of ways of looking at this, and it's probably going to irritate some people, and that's fine. But no matter which way you vote, and we generally have one of two ways to choose from, you're going to end up getting the same damn thing. Why is it that I can't draw bright line distinctions between one presidential regime and the next? Why do they all end up looking the same? And it's because of the intractable nature of power. People crave it. And once they get it, they just want to keep it. And it's very hard to point to anyone presently right now. I think we might have 5 or 6 examples. But it's very hard to point to anyone and say, that's a principled human being. And here's the way to think about this. Name me 10 politicians you want living in your neighborhood.
Well, that would be tough.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Name me
even the ones I would consider the good ones have slowly horse traded and log rolled away their souls to keep their incumbency.
I think that's right.
And I mean there are some, I think, that because you have to, it's like, and I understand the need for making compromises, right? Because you can get folks who operated to, like Ron Paul, for example, who justified getting all the goodies back to Texas by saying, well, we're just getting our tax money back. And he gets it in the form of what? Stuff that goes to the state government. I mean,
I get it, but we've got a House of Representatives with 435 people in it and a Senate with 100. Of 535 representatives, I can think of 2.
Exactly.
That I would want living next door to me.
Thomas Massey would be one of them for me, and he doesn't live near people. He lives out in the sticks with his permaculture and stuff.
Oddly enough, we agree on that, Max. And look, it's worse than that, right? Because if I ask you a different question, in the last 30 years, how many politicians can you say that you respect? It's the same kind of list.
I can count on one hand.
On one hand, that's right.
And that's not just ideological alignment, because there are some that I respect despite disagreeing with them.
Look, I agreed with Daniel Patrick Moynihan about almost nothing, and he was eminently respectable. I would have loved to have spent real time with him. Right? He was a gentleman, a scholar, and in government. But in that order, right? And that was important.
I mean, to me, this is a system of incentives and graft and horse trading and malevolence and venality that completely pushes out virtue and virtuous people.
Of course it does.
It takes them and chews them up and spits them out.
Mhm.
That's the nature of the system. That's the nature of the beast.
And it's worse than people think, right? Because if you take any small town in America and look at small town politics,
Same
exactly
shit.
the same, exactly the same, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to. I have an HOA board here. These are the worst people in the world.
Those
Why?
petty tyrants.
Because all they want to do is tell everybody else what they must do.
Yeah.
Well, and if you think about it, in order to go into politics, you have to want to tell other people what they must do. And
Right.
I don't want anybody who clears that bar to have authority over anything.
And yet that's the standard, isn't it?
And that's all we're ever going to get. And
Yeah.
Plato knew this 2,500 years ago. He says as much. So it's nothing new. It's not a thing in the West. This has no global home except the whole globe, right? This is just how people behave. And I say this so often, I must say it every day. I just want to be left alone. I walk around saying it like a mantra. And the more I say it, the less people leave me alone.
Well,
And that's how it is, right?
so that's a good way to bring up the next topic I want to discuss. Okay, so you want to be left alone. I want to be left alone. And by the way, that doesn't just mean leave me alone. I want to go over here and hoard my bars of gold in the corner. It might mean I want to be left alone to engage my community charitably, compassionately, lovingly, in my way,
That's
instead
right.
of outsourcing responsibility and capital or resources to distant capitals. I want that to stay local. I want it to stay in my house so that I can share with the people I know and love, and we can build this together. But there are opportunity costs to that for every dollar that's taxed away.
Mm-hmm.
That is such a hard point to get people to see. So, but this is to some extent like the nature of this show. So if you're a first-time listener, I'm going to tell you this. A lot of what we're going to talk about on this show, and so poor James is going to have to get, a little bit of it this time, is the idea of liberatory innovation. Okay? Liberatory innovation, if you'll bear with me for a moment, covers basically three things. The first is introduce a system or a solution that does the following: that A, reduces transactions or cooperation costs, okay? Makes it easier for people to collaborate with each other or exchange, right? Number two, raises predation and parasitism costs. That means makes it harder for people to intervene in our lives, yoinking our money, whatever. And C, did I say A to C? Anyway, the third one is reducing switching costs to go from one system to one that might serve us better. Okay? That is pretty much the sort of economic dynamics behind what I call subversive innovation. And one of the most pronounced examples that we're aware of that allows us to do it, no matter what the powerful say, is Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So what are your thoughts on liberatory innovation and cryptocurrency in general? And maybe on from that, how much promise do you have for this idea of exiting systems or forming ways to keep people out of our lives using creative means? How much promise do you think there is with that path?
I think the only honest answer is I don't know. Right? I really don't know. And I think you've got to really be humble when you look at things like this. You have to admit the things that you don't really know. Now, what do I know? A lot of people have bought into Bitcoin. There are a lot of people out there who have said, we think this is a viable thing that could literally replace money down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe. I could see it. Do I think it's likely? No, not terribly. But it seems to offer people the ability to transfer wealth across political boundaries, right, where they wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. And isn't that fascinating? So, look, it does seem to serve some purpose. I can't go down to the grocery store and pay with it, and that's a problem that's going to have to be solved, right? If you really want this to work, regular people are going to have to be able to use it, and that brings up another point. Look, I sadly did not buy Bitcoin because I didn't take the time to try to figure out how that happens. All I heard were, "Oh, I bought all this Bitcoin and then it's gone." Well, I can't do that with my life savings, right? I have to I have to marshal my resources, and if I don't understand how something gets done, and honestly, Max, to this day, if you said go buy some Bitcoin, I don't know that I could do it. Not in a way that I would know for sure I wasn't being taken, right? And so all these things have to shake out. But notice, these are all technical questions, and technical questions are answerable, right? There's no metaphysical question here. The same way gold is money. Well, gold isn't anything. It's a shiny yellow rock that we mine out of the earth that has no intrinsic value. Oh, wait a minute. Nothing has any intrinsic value. Everything is a value we assign to something. So is Bitcoin worth anything? Yeah, a lot of people think so, about $100,000 per coin right now. I wish to God I had bought it when it was like 8 cents.
I'm hoping it's not down to 100,000. I think it's around 115, 117, but I haven't looked in a couple of days.
Now I'm just even more pissed than I was just a minute ago. God. And, look, if anybody out there happened to buy way too many, wants to unload some, I'd be more than happy to help you out. But, that's probably not going to happen. Why? Because it's a store of value of a sort. It's a very volatile store of value. So a lot of people aren't going to go near it. They're going to want things like real estate and T-bills, but it is a store of value. And as far as that's true, and as far as we're really asking technical questions, not metaphysical ones, I'm kind of optimistic about it. And maybe in the end, maybe 300 years from now, we'll look back and we say, wow, everybody got real worked up about Bitcoin. They really should have been thinking about this other one that stood the test of time when Bitcoin crashed and burned for whatever reason. And so I don't, the
quantum computer hacked it or whatever. Yeah.
Look, it's kind of like being in the early 1950s and finding out about this thing called television and then investing all of your money in the Dumont network. Well, you lose. The Dumont network disappeared pretty quickly. Should have gone with CBS. But it wasn't television that was wrong. It was the call about the channel that was wrong, right? So that's about where I sit on Bitcoin and many things like it. Technological innovation never looks the same in 100 years.
Yeah, it's funny because the Bitcoin, they call themselves maxis, Bitcoin maximalists. I am sympathetic to their position in terms of the specific properties that Bitcoin provides.
Yeah.
And it's a very narrow set of properties. And of course, there have been Bitcoin forks. The incentives have driven the other forks either price way down or out of existence, like BSV, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin small block prevailed, and there are these group of cultists called Bitcoin maximalists. And they make a point. What I like to say, because they hate crypto and they call crypto enthusiasts shitcoiners, right? Because people happen to value other properties besides the properties that Bitcoin instantiates. Well, I'm what you might call a Bitcoin mostly, even though I'm not a maxi. And I do see the values and some of the other properties of some of these other tokens because they're fantastic in terms of executing distributed finance or decentralized finance, using smart contracts for such effects, and so on. There's a lot of things that these other technologies can do that Bitcoin can't, and so like everything else, it's trade-offs. and all of them operate in a kind of evolutionary ecosystem. Well, Bitcoin might go the way of the dodo, like you said, in 100 years. It might not. It might evolve. It might evolve but persist relative to the fitness landscape. So, for example, like we were talking about the quantum computers that potentially could hack it, they may upgrade it to some degree so that it is resistant to quantum computing attacks. I don't know. I hope so, because I own enough Bitcoin to that much of my retirement is depending on its maintaining some value. But here's the question. I, like you, am optimistic about these kinds of technologies, and indeed other forms of what you might call liberatory innovation, like the creation of special economic zones in places like Honduras. I happen to know some of the principals in Prospera, and I hope to get them on the show. But that requires a mixture of what we might call bottom up and top down, right? Yeah. So the top down piece is, what do we need to liberalize, for example, in the United States, to make it more likely that people can accept Bitcoin nationwide and legally be able to do so, or whatever, some other cryptocurrency? What do we need to have to ensure that there is a special jurisdiction that can be shielded from the political winds and corruption of the system around it, like Prospera, where the Honduran system is completely FUBAR and corrupt in most respects. But there's that, the bottom up is like, there were some entrepreneurs that set up the jurisdiction, established the set of laws. They knew what good institutions are. They brought in companies. They're continuing to bring in companies. And the socialist mainland isn't threatening to stop them all the while, right?
Yet.
So they had to get permission to set up shop there. So a lot of these liberatory innovations aren't just like, yeah, man, we can do whatever the hell we want because nobody can stop us, right? They can track you. They tracked down Ross Ulbricht, with, what do they call it? Blockchain forensics, and they've had other people they've caught with blockchain forensics, and other properties of other coins are better at obscuring people's identity so they can engage in pseudonymous trade. But I guess my point is that is a kind of an evolutionary arms race that's happening right now. And it makes these technologies stronger and better. And it may also mean that people migrate. So if you are an organism in that ecosystem like Bitcoin, you got to adapt or die, right? But there's also still the top-down issue. People don't take Bitcoin or whatever because you're taxed in US dollars and you got to pay the tax man. And it might be a whole hell of a lot of trouble from an accounting standpoint to be able to take something like Bitcoin, convert it to enough dollars, and so on. And then what kind of tax hit do you have to take from a separate kind of tax, so you're doubly taxed, in order to realize it? It becomes a complicated mess, and it's not that interoperable. I'm banging on, but the final point on that is the top-down and bottom-up nature is that sometimes these work in tandem. And as optimistic as I am about these bottom-up technologies and these kind of plans, I know at some level we have to deal with fucking power.
Yeah, it's interesting though, Max. And look, using Bitcoin right now to buy something, well, I can't go to the store and use euros to buy anything either. Right?
Yeah.
So it, again, a technical problem. But I'm just a touch older than you. I'm going to just say that so I can feel better. Not terribly, but a touch. And when I first started as a professor, my students asked me, I remember it like it was yesterday. They said, "Do you think there'll ever be legal marijuana in the United States?" And I went, "You got to be kidding me. Of course not. Don't be ridiculous. There must be 50 weed stores within a mile and a half of my house right now." So things have changed a little bit. Was it bottom up or top down? Well, it was both. It was bottom up. It was bottom up first.
All of a sudden, people on the left love states' rights. And me.
Look,
I like both states' rights and marijuana, for example.
it was bottom up first, right? A bunch of people said, to hell with you guys, we want this. And, you know, the only thing that we had ever heard was that Bill Clinton took a toke but never inhaled, which just makes him the world's worst friend. Right? I mean, come on, man. If you're not going to smoke it, don't take it. Pass it along to the next guy. And then that same semester, a student raised her hand and said, "Do you ever think we'll have gay marriage in the United States?" I said, "Oh, you got to be kidding me. Please." And to the eternal credit of the American people, the gays said, "Hey, why are we different from you in this respect?" And the American people sat back and thought about it for a fucking minute and said, "Oh, you're right. You're really not." And do people still rail against gay marriage? Of course they do. Right? I'm not Pollyannish about these things, but these are two colossal things that changed incredibly in my lifetime.
My kids ask me what I do for work, and I say, I write, talk into a microphone, and hope people send money. Now I'm questioning my life choices, but the kids gotta eat, and we have bureaucracies to topple. Support our work at underthrow.org, and for less than $5 a month, you'll help me rouse the rabble. Wait, what's underthrow? If overthrow is violent, underthrow is peaceful yet powerful. Real change doesn't start in Washington. Casting your vote with millions is like crying a teardrop into the ocean. Instead, we build consent-based communities that make traditional power structures obsolete. Left, right, or center, it doesn't matter. What matters is creating options for opting out and opting in. We build parallel systems in which people thrive, then just leave the old systems behind. It's about choosing communities, not imposing them. So, support the show, feed my kids, read the newsletter, and discover why most subversive acts amount to building a better civilization together. Visit underthrow.org. Well, but here's the thing about the examples that you've provided, and they're good ones. And they're, I think, the special interests and favor seekers and people who benefit from the status quo in those systems weren't that strong and there just weren't that many. But if you start talking about messing with the financial system, where you socialize the failure of banks and privatize the profits, that's the regime we live in now, of course.
That's right.
That is shored up by a system where the dollar has a monopoly and enjoys being the world's reserve currency. How do you change something like that? Because there's a hell of a lot of people who don't want to see you, or even better, maybe healthcare reform, because there's insurers, there's doctors, and there's pharma, and they're all in a cartel together.
I'm going to tell you flat out that I'm not talking about healthcare. Not today, probably not for a long time. It's so complicated. We've tried to do it, Ant and I, on our podcast, and between the two of us, we understand almost nothing about it. It's so complex that we can't find anybody who understands enough about it to come and talk about it rationally. So, all right, let's set that one off to the side. Bitcoin, on the other hand, I don't think you're going to have to say, will government allow it? When will the tipping point happen? Government will cause it by inflating away the value of the dollar. As the dollar is worth less and less, things that compete with the dollar are definitionally worth more and more. And everybody who has a little bit of gold and silver tucked away knows that, or they wouldn't have any gold and silver tucked away. It's the same thing with Bitcoin, right? The dollar is going to become much more worthless than it is right now. And that's just a given. And when that happens, Bitcoin will be infinitely more attractive. It'll also, by then, be infinitely more expensive. Adjusted for inflation, it might not be, but you'll have to pay more dollars to get it. So, well, that's just how it goes, right? Nothing costs what it did in 1957.
It's interesting. There's a James C. Scott. He was an old Yale professor. I think he might have passed recently. But if he's still living, bless him, he's an incredible, brilliant man. But he had this idea that he called Irish democracy. And I don't know if he coined the term or not, but he basically describes people who had been living under an imperial thumb for so long that they basically learned how not to comply.
Mhm.
They weren't loud about it. They didn't raise a fuss, because if you stick your head up, somebody's going to knock it down. But they figured out ways to not comply or work in the underground and this sort of thing. Same with the Eastern Bloc. During the Soviet era, there were syndicates and networks and markets in the underground that they would call black market, we would call gray, that worked, and they just did it. Do you think we're going to reach that point with the monetary system and the economic?
I suspect. Look, there's always a market in everything all the time. And we decide collectively what we think is legitimate and illegitimate. And that's not, that's an unremarkable assertion. There are all kinds of illegitimate markets. Do you really want children to be bought and sold? Of course you don't, right? That's an illegitimate market. Do you want nuclear material, fissionable material to be bought and sold on the open market? No, you don't. Okay. I just picked the two easy ones.
Right.
What about
kidneys?
Look, I'm fine with kidneys. It's hearts that I worry about. Well, it is. You can live with one kidney. If a person came to me and he said, I will give you $250 million for your heart, I would have to take it. Why? Because I have a family and they're important. And if I could give them that, their lives would be wonderful forever.
Maybe. Money's not everything, but I hear what you're saying. They'd be taken care of financially forever.
Yeah. And you see the problem there. It's an obvious problem, and it's one that would come up. Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are on the margins. They're not right down the middle of the street. But, you know, if you want to donate a kidney, great. If you want to sell a kidney, I don't care. All it means is there's going to be more kidneys for more people who need kidneys. And that's a good thing. Right. So, you know, there are markets in everything. I think almost all of them are perfectly legitimate, regardless of what the government says. Right. So right now, I really want to try DMT. I've said this many times. Sounds really impressive. The government has decided that I can't do that. Markets have decided that maybe I can if I can locate the market. Heretofore, haven't been able to. Damn my luck. But I'm going to keep looking. And it's like that with all kinds of things. All kinds of things. Power to me.
Amen. Well, that is, wow. There are two different directions I want to go in now, because there's both really interesting things. And you talking about DMT made me forget about the first one.
Let's maybe stay away from that one. Lest we all get yelled at later.
Right. But I agree with you. Most what we call black markets are not legitimate, because the term legitimate really just means legal, but you mean legitimate in the sense of justifiable, or it is unjustifiable that they are proscribed. I agree with you about that. I think, and I think a lot of these days are warming up to that idea since marijuana has been, cannabis has slowly been decriminalized around the country. And
guess what? The world didn't come to a glorious end because of it. No.
I mean, all the states that legalized first are really in the shitter. You know, it was Oregon, Washington, Colorado, California. Those are all states that are swirling the bowl, but not because of marijuana or cannabis. It's because of the other kinds of insane batshittery that their political classes believe in, and to some extent their electorate. But this makes me think of libertarians, okay? And
I think about them a lot too.
Do you?
Well,
let's talk about them if you want. Sure. Maybe I can make you some enemies.
I can guarantee you make me some enemies.
Well, we have to admit, I don't call myself a libertarian anymore.
You'd have to be crazy to call yourself a libertarian now.
Well, tell me why.
Because all it does is call to mind naked people running up on stage and other people wearing tinfoil hats.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not part of that. I'm a classical liberal, Max. I'm in league with Jefferson and Madison, right? Those crazy libertarian kids from the 1770s, 1780s, who had this ridiculous thought that government should be small, budgets should be balanced, and rights should be protected. Well, that sounds like a prescription for me right there.
If the brand weren't so toxic, associated, for example, with people wearing tinfoil hats and jumping up on the stage naked, and I remember, that image is seared into my brain, actually.
The people who get naked in public are exactly the people who should not get naked in public.
And should not run for any elective office either, but never you mind. Is it that it's a toxic brand, or do you think that there's some really goofy things that libertarians believe?
Oh, I don't think those are mutually exclusive.
Okay. Let's talk about some of those goofy libertarian things.
In a perfect world, right, in a world that actually made sense, that was logical, libertarian and classical liberal, there would be no variance. The Venn diagram would overlap completely. So that's what I think should be the case. What is the case? Oh, man, here we go. Libertarians. Well, first, they don't even want to talk to anybody who can't pass a doctrinal test, a purity test of some kind, right? So after what I just said, they don't want to talk to me about anything. They say things, idiotic things. Anthony and I were asked to moderate the South Carolina Libertarian presidential debate last time around. And candidates, ostensible, we all know they're not really candidates for the presidency, but ostensible candidates for the presidency were saying things like, well, if I'm elected, I'll eliminate Social Security tomorrow. No, you won't. Of course you won't. Why? Because you can't. That would take 100 years to wind down. We've actually done the math. You should wind it down. You should allow people to opt out of it. These are just freedom issues. But you can't just eliminate that tomorrow. We didn't get here because somebody yesterday said, let's have Social Security. So to Medicare. You can't just take that away. You have to figure out how to unravel that. And unraveling that's going to be very difficult, right? So they start with these idiotic things, which utterly guarantee that as a political party, they will go nowhere.
Well, even whether and to what extent they're right on the merits, like the dynamics of the constituency groups that currently benefit from Social Security, the ones that are about to, the ones that have paid into the system, and all the people who think it's a grand idea. That alone is enough of a problem. But the idea that you think that you're going to be some sort of libertarian monarch that just comes in and
that's right. Waves that magic scepter. Right?
Yeah.
The elder wand that they all seem to think they have.
You're a monarchist libertarian and not a Republican in the sense of a republic.
Yeah. Smaller.
Yeah, that sounds about right, though. It's like standing up and saying what you believe we ought to do is not giving us an idea of how you're going to get there.
It's utterly goofy and also utterly goofy. Can you, with a straight face, be an open borders person in a welfare state? What are you thinking? I mean, come on. Look, I'm very much in favor of scrapping our entire immigration system. It's corrupt, it's worthless, it's bad in almost every way.
Yes, indeed.
But that doesn't mean you shouldn't have one. That means you shouldn't have that one. And if you want to have open borders, I'm with you. Okay, let's unravel the entire welfare state first.
Well, I'll go one further. And this is the thing I think is that context matters. And Milton Friedman understood this. This is not just an issue of whether and to what extent people can get on the welfare state. And I think that is an important point because as we saw over the last 4 years, people are coming in, getting on the gravy train immediately because the Democratic Party is buying not future voters, but they're buying populations and sending them to states that are losing populations because they suck and they're losing congressional power. So through apportionment, the Democrats are paying people to come in, paying coyotes and inadvertently supporting a system that allows tons of people to go in and move into these states so that they can preserve their congressional seats.
I would walk that back. I would walk that back a half inch and say they have created the incentives for this to happen.
Right. Absolutely. They created the incentives for this to happen. They knew it would happen. It was a plan. And this is why nobody said peep to Barack Obama when he was the deporter in chief. They're behind it now because there's two constituency groups, the bootleggers and the Baptists. The Baptists are going, whoa, you're kidnapping people, and they're just good people. They just want to work, and you're evil. And then there's the groups behind them who are funding all this stuff, who want to keep the Democratic Party in power and are worried about these population losses from states like Illinois, New York, and California, which happen to be the states that are fighting the hardest against getting these people deported. Now, here's one more for you. You'll see what you think. I might make some more enemies with this. This is phase one. Well, first of all, and when I hear these kind of, and they're good arguments, they really are. The sort of Brian Kaplan argument about the economic thing, about how, you can improve someone's life immeasurably just by allowing them to cross a border, and you can improve your life immeasurably too. From an economic standpoint, I totally get that.
I would be remiss if I didn't point people to Reason Magazine, who has a brilliant writer on immigration issues named Fiona Harrigan.
Right. Yeah, right. I've heard of her.
You should go check out what Fiona's got to say, because it's not what I've got to say. But she's not an unreasonable person.
Yeah, I know this kid, James Borders, who produces this show, which is really weird, just a coincidence. But in any case, I'll read her stuff. I encourage everybody to read Fiona Harrigan. But here's the other piece of it. Look at Europe right now. Look at what they have done. There is such thing as culture clash. There is such thing as having ideological misalignment to the degree that you will never be able to assimilate people. The Muslim takeover of Europe is a foregone conclusion in my mind. Consider the demographic trends. The indigenous Europeans are replacing themselves at a rate between 1.2 and 1.4, which is to say they're not replacing themselves.
Yep,
they're shrinking.
They're as good as gone.
And the Muslim population is above replacement rate. So that's the first.
Just for people who don't know, replacement rate's about 2.2.
Right. I think, 2.1, 2.2. Yeah. So it's like you got to reproduce yourself and your wife and a little bit extra.
And a little bit more. So
a little bit more.
Broadly speaking, some people need to have 2 kids and other people need to have 3.
Exactly.
But of course, a lot will have 0 and a lot will have 9 and things like this. But yeah.
Statistically, that's exactly right. So you're going to start getting just endogenous growth of the Muslim population, and they are absolutely not drinking the liberal Kool-Aid of Europe.
No, they're not.
Whatever's left of it, right?
They're not. And it will turn into a problem. It's already a problem, but it will turn into a far greater one. But the larger point here is that literally every single person who enters a culture, no matter how big, changes that culture. Now, it's infinitesimally small on the individual level because, we have 350 million Americans. How much difference is one of them going to make? Well, not much. But as groups get bigger and as time goes by, you see how these things shake out. Culturally, we are not the same now as we were 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 150 years ago, nor were any of those 2 points the same. So I'm not against culture evolving over time. I just think you have to be mighty careful about how to put this. You have to be very careful about what you allow in and what you force out, because there are always unintended consequences to both of those things. And notice, I'm not saying don't let Muslims in. I'm not. Look, your listeners don't know this. Well, you mentioned it. I lived in Iraq for a while. It was fine. And we could probably do an entire episode on shit that's the same there and here, because it's a big, long list. We're not that different. Now, the culture clashes that I'm seeing in Europe, and I am seeing them, indicates that there are some functional differences. And they're important. And they're going to have to get worked out somehow. And if you're a free and open society, you may have to be an unfree society to the extent that you have to look at people who come in and say, you have to adapt to us. Freedom matters. And if you come here wanting to subvert our freedoms, you got to go. And
This is the tough issue, too, because let's just say, I mean, there have been all sorts of estimates. The estimates for what you would call an Islamist, it is one who is doctrinally committed to an eventual caliphate and Sharia law.
A global caliphate.
A global caliphate. The people who are committed to that, the percentage of people who are committed to that in Europe right now are estimated to be between 35 and 45%.
Yeah, and if it were 7%, you'd have a problem.
That's exactly right. If it were only 7%, you would still have a problem, but it's way more than that.
Yep.
So what do you do about that?
Liberal country.
On this podcast, we are committed to what we call the philosophy of human respect.
Yeah.
And the philosophy of human respect is we don't harm others, right?
No, that's right.
We don't harm other innocent people.
That's
Anybody who would come into your membrane that you described, regulating what comes in and what goes out and the unintended consequences. We don't know who holds a certain kind of views. Like there is a Shiite idea called, is it Taqiyya? I think it's what it's called. It starts with a T. Forgive me, I don't speak Arabic. But the idea is that it's okay to lie in certain kinds of circumstances as long as it's for the eventual will of Allah and His supremacy and the eventual submission to Allah around the world, right?
You can imagine the trouble I had with that when I was the dean of the American University of Iraq.
Exactly. And you're teaching them about republicanism.
Oh boy, did I get lied to. I was in charge of all discipline on the campus. I got lied to moment by moment.
Yeah, so it's like if you can tell yourself this is for Allah's will,
look,
then
you're going to have to come to terms with, and this goes all the way back to Pericles' funeral oration, which you can find in Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, this year, the Peloponnesian War. He broke a different way than I'm about to. Liberal societies are going to have to find it in their hearts to do occasional or to have occasional very illiberal policies in the name of self-preservation.
Yeah.
And the problem, look, and it is. And right on the surface, every rational person will listen to what I just said and go, yeah, James, that's right. And then let's just think about it for a second, because given what we already said about the nature of power, you know we're going to go wrong with this. You know we are. Governments cannot be trusted. They cannot be. And when you allow and encourage a government to do illiberal things, it will. And then it won't stop.
It'll never stop. This actually gives me pause. This is this paradox that you're describing, because I think you're right. And notwithstanding my commitment to human respect, the way I formulate human respect is that it must be reciprocal. And if we can't engage in some sort of social compact that ensures that reciprocity between us, then you don't belong in our membrane. Right.
Yeah. And I say this often.
Libertarians think otherwise, by the way.
A corporate people has every right to determine who they want to allow in to become part of them.
Right.
That's an unremarkable assertion in political science circles. That's just, yeah, that's right. But
if you tried to say it's time for us to load up all the Muslims in Dearborn or whatever in the United States right now, and in Texas, where they're trying to set up these little Sharia enclaves in certain parts of different areas around the country, if we say, well, it's time, we're going to show you the door. If you're not a citizen, you've been here long enough. We gave you an opportunity. If you can't get citizenship or whatever, but it's time to go, because we just can't be fully persuaded that you are assimilating and adopting the civic religion of the United States, which is some form of liberalism.
Yeah, assimilation is the key word.
Assimilation is the key word, and if you can't assimilate, then we're gonna have to deport you. They're gonna call it ethnic cleansing. They're gonna go, and they're gonna say our voters, and this is why we're getting this interesting collusion or nexus or something between the socialist wing or the communist wing even of the left and the Muslim population. You got a bunch of socialists running around wearing keffiyehs all the time, or what are they called? Keffiyehs? The little scarves. This is troubling, and it's because of the illiberal nature of both. They're in collusion right now. Now, when one of them finally ascends to power, they're not going to stay a team necessarily. One of them's going to want socialism, and one of them's going to want Sharia, and they're going to end up having to fight it out if one of them succeeds in overtaking and creating some sort of illiberal society where the final vestiges of liberalism are suppressed more than to the degree they already are.
I mean, look, this is an easy call in a lot of ways. Do Muslims bother me as a group? No, not exactly. No, they don't. Am I against Muslims immigrating to the United States? No, not really.
1 million of them a year, though?
Well, no, not necessarily. But am I against Muslims telling their daughters they're not allowed to go to school? You bet I am. You bet I am.
But once they've been given permission to come, see, you can't know that in advance.
That's right. You can't.
If you put on a quote unquote Muslim ban, that makes you illiberal and bad.
Thus the paradox, right? Because I'm telling you, I want to do the best thing for all parties concerned. And look, take my word for it. I really do want to do the best for all parties concerned. I want everybody to have a better life tomorrow than they had today. Literally every single person.
But everybody in the collective needs to feel the same way as you for any form of classical liberalism, libertarianism, or otherwise, to maintain integrity. Because there's no reciprocity there, they're going to bide their time until their numbers get to a point where they're prepared to institute Sharia law. They have the numbers.
I'll tell you a couple of things that you will, I think, find both amusing and fascinating. As dean, I was expected to teach one class. The class I taught to Iraqis, American government. Perfect sense, right? Sure, of course that's what it was. And we were going over the First Amendment, and they were befuddled by this religion stuff. And I said, look, in the United States, I have no idea what religion any of my neighbors even are, nor do I care. And they couldn't believe it. Not that, they just couldn't get their hands around it. Because there, where 99.8% of everybody is the same thing, there is tremendous pressure to behave in certain ways. And it was really no different than when I lived amongst the Mormons in Utah. The group behaviors were very, very similar. I don't want to say they were the same. Clearly they weren't. But the pressures internally on the individual members were undeniable. You see, remember, I once had to go pick up liquor for a function we were having at the college. So I went down the motor pool. I got a car and a driver, took me to the liquor store run by Coptic Christians, right? There are liquor stores all over the place. And I got out of the cab. The cab driver got out and yelled at me in a language I couldn't understand, threw his hands up in the air like my angry Italian grandmother, and drove away. What the fuck was that? I figured, well, all right. I went in, I bought all the liquor, I came back out, and here he comes coming down the side street. And he gets out and he opens the door for me. And I said, what was that? He said, oh, it was a guy from Musk right on the corner. If he saw me dropping you off at the liquor store, I'd get in trouble. But notice he didn't care. And when I got to Utah, what was the first advice I got? If you go fishing, don't take one Mormon, take two. Because if you take one, he'll drink all your beer. It's the same exact story.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But the better one, I woke up at like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. My phone was buzzing and buzzing and buzzing. And I looked at it, always a mistake, right? And it said, Obama killed. And I thought, oh God, President Joe Biden. Oh, that's bad news. And I went back to sleep. And I woke up and I looked at it and it said, Osama killed. And I thought, oh my, I'm in the Middle East. This is going to be a rough day. And I said, I got to get to work early today. And I said, and I got out and I got to work real early. And the college, it was a small one and it had blast walls all around, hard to get into. But, the students would just kind of shuffle on in, and there was never a collection of people outside the blast walls. Why would there be? If there were blast walls, you need blast walls. And if you need blast walls, you want to be on the inside, not the outside. But that day I got to the building, and all of the students were outside the blast walls, and they were literally dancing in the street. Literally dancing in the street. And one came running up to me, and he grabbed me by my lapels. And he said, sir, what a great day this is. And I said, well, shit, this isn't what I was expecting. And I said, why is it a great day, if you don't mind my asking? And he said, because he's not one of us.
Right.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Right? That was an interesting thing. So don't forget that side of the story either. It's an important side, and it's the bigger side. It might not be big enough.
Well,
but it is the bigger side.
Right. And this is why this conversation about 7% versus 20% versus 35%, it's like it's kind of intractable, and it's a shame, because I don't want to sit here and say that I don't have Muslims in my life who aren't wonderful, and some of my best friends are Muslims, as they say.
Checks in the mail, and one other thing that I can't remember.
Yeah, well, exactly. But it's the same thing as it's something similar to what we might have said about the way Christians treated people back in the 1600s in early America, right? It's a similar kind of, it's just whatever form of, what is the concentration of fundamentalists in your sect? And are they willing to impose their views on you through the coercive apparatus of the state or mob rule, whatever?
Yeah, and look, I would go right to the Irish in the 19th century, right? The Americans, the nativists at the time, couldn't wait not to allow any Irish in. Mm-hmm. Can you, in any rational understanding, can you imagine a United States without the Irish component?
No, it's like now.
No.
It's like
there are more people in America claiming Irish heritage than there are in Ireland.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I used to live in Chicago, and they're everywhere.
And it's a net positive. Now, look, I can say this, I think, without too much controversy. The stereotype is real. The Irish drink a touch too much, and they get a little unruly when they do. Boys will be boys, right? And that's about how we've come to look at it. But at one time, that was tearing apart the social fabric.
Yeah, they were the garbage people, right?
They were the garbage people. And,
yeah,
I never, whenever I,
too.
Yep, and I'm Irish Italian, right? So I got this story from both sides of the family. And whenever I think about immigrants coming, I temper my thoughts, whatever they may be, with stories like that, because I'm humble and I don't know how it's going to work out. I do know that our immigration system is a catastrophe.
Yeah.
It needs to be scrapped and rebuilt from nothing. Utterly scrapped. I could write a better one in one evening than we've got now, right? And it's not that hard. And then we have to figure out what works and what doesn't, and what the culture looks like and what it should look like, and what we give away freely and what we retain. I mean, hey, maybe you allow lots of people in as economic citizens, but you don't give them political citizenship. Nobody ever even thinks about that. Why the hell not? That's a perfectly reasonable alternative, right? That if you want to come and open a shop, go ahead. You're not getting anything. There's no social program for you. Your own people can knit together and form their version of Tammany Hall and have their version of welfare for you. But you're not getting it from the rest of us. But hey, if you want to come here and try and make it on your merits, and you really think you're up to the task, go ahead.
Well, and that is a pressure cooker means of assimilating people too.
Yeah.
When you have to figure out how to get by in society, and you don't just have all of these groups of people that are allowed to subsist on the welfare state and balkanize, then assimilation happens. The Irish became Americans.
They did. And in my Italian family, I once asked my grandmother why we didn't speak Italian. And she says, I only know the swear words. I'm like, God, if my grandmother only knows the swear words. And I said, why? And she said, because when I was a girl, my parents said, we're Americans now, speak English. Do I think something was lost? Yeah, I do. That language would have made the texture of my family very different. And it's, I think, a beautiful, important thing that was lost. Do I think something was gained? Oh, absolutely. Assimilation was gained. Do I go on to get a PhD if I only learned how to speak Italian in America?
Probably not.
Probably not. Probably not. So there you go. You keep saying the word trade-offs, and yes, there's literally a trade-off for everything. So if you really want something out there, if you say, we must, and I hate it when people use the word must, but if they say, we must do X, all right, what are you willing to give up to do X? How far does it go? How bad do you want it? Now, these are deeper questions, and these are the questions that we don't ask. And they're the only questions that we have to ask. Notice I didn't say must. We have to ask these questions if we expect our culture, our society, and our politics to work.
I hesitate to launch into the question about endogenously created illiberal movements and how a society, there is no such thing as society, there are only agglomerations of people, and they have varying degrees of power to act or not in concert against other groups. So I want to make that clear. But what I mean by that is, I think back on the Red Scares of the 1920s. I think about McCarthyism, when that was like the second big Red Scare, when they were making blacklists of people who were supposedly associated with the communists. And the older I get, I've always thought that that was evil, that people are entitled to their political views and let's air all of our ideas and this and that. But I have become, at least I understand or am somewhat sympathetic to what would motivate McCarthyism or a Red Scare. It is that thing, like, it is fear of the other. It is fear of the ideological other. And there's a healthy dose of that that's to be had.
Yeah,
Blacklist of your fellow countrymen is probably not.
I think it's a little worse. I think it's a little worse than that, because I think what a lot of people, and I'm not aiming this at any one group necessarily, although I think you'll see exactly who I mean at this very moment. There are large constituencies who aren't concerned with doing better. They're concerned that the other, does worse, because it's not exactly about economics and financial well-being. It's about societal status. And that's, that gets us far into the weeds. There are no simple answers here. And
right.
everybody who says there is one is lying to you. And am I going to get 1 million followers on YouTube by saying these sorts of things? No, because nobody gets 1 million followers by speaking the obvious, complicated truth. It's just not how it's done. I'd have to be Ben Shapiro, who doesn't speak the complex truth. He's got his vision of the truth. He's right about lots of things. He's real sharp, right? He's great in an argument, but he never, at the end of saying the thing he wants the most, he never sits back and says, and here's the real problem with what I just said that I want. Well, here's the real problem with what I just said that I want. people will not ask those hard questions because that's not human nature.
Right. They want cognitive shortcuts. They want moralisms. They want to operate according to principle because it's simple and simple-minded. And I find that really quite unfortunate. I disparaged the brilliant Brian Kaplan's views on sort of narrowly economic understanding of immigration earlier. But he has introduced the concept of rational and irrationality on top of the idea of rational ignorance. And I think that was Kaplan who introduced that concept. And I think it's a really worthwhile one. It's sort of, why do people believe the things that they do? And it's usually because it's either low cost to adopt the view and there's no immediate consequence in which you have to bear a cost of holding that belief, or having some kind of knowledge is costly to obtain. We should get rid of and agitate for the getting rid of mohair subsidies in Congress. We should make sure we call our congressmen to get rid of mohair subsidies. Well, most people don't even know what mohair is, much less that it's subsidized.
Well, most people don't know what a subsidy is.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, creates these massive sort of nationwide dynamics that make voters rationally irrational and rationally ignorant. So I am troubled sometimes, but even when you can take that aside and just talk about why can't people just have a set of principles?
Well, it's not just voting, right? I mean, I log on to Facebook and I see a bunch of dumbasses who can't even fact check the first thing that they keep posting. I mean, yesterday I saw at least 5 people post a quote by Patrick Henry about how the United States was formed by godly Christians and it can only be run by Christians. Okay, I looked at that and I said, that doesn't sound like anything Patrick Henry would have said. So what did I do? Like an idiot, I went and looked it up. He didn't. You know who did? It was a segregationist Virginia newspaper from the 1950s. That's where that quote comes from. So all these people are unwittingly making the case that segregationists wanted to make. Congratulations. way to fucking go. And when you point it out, what's the last thing they do? Oh, really? Thanks for telling me. No. Well, it's not wrong. Kind of is.
Yeah.
And that's just where we are. And I don't think we're unique for it. I just think that we're so hyper connected at this point that we all see it, right? The village idiots have found a way to be together, and turns out they created a pretty powerful block.
I'm okay with that as long as your jurisdiction is small and you don't have any power over me.
This is one of the many reasons why I just want to be left alone, and the only way I will be. Look, you as an anarchist of any flavor and me as a minarchist of any flavor believe exactly the same things until we get to the very, very end of 1,000 political victories that we will never experience. So what is it that I want? I want to be more free than I am right now. Do I want to be free? Yes. Do I know that's never going to happen? Indeed, I do. So what? I want to be more free. I want things to be better. Don't let the great be the enemy of the good, right? This is good advice. Don't be chasing something, and this is where libertarians go wrong all the time. Doctrinal tests of purity are worthless. They get you groups of 2.
Yeah.
You and the one other dude you agree with. And groups of 2 accomplish nothing.
The late economist Steve Horowitz once said something like, well, if you agree with me on all this other stuff, we can worry about the roads at the end, how the roads.
Yeah, that's right.
Ask, how will you build the roads?
We've got a lot of work to do together.
That markets, that individual entrepreneurs creating values in markets, create value for customers and for each other, that this is the way to create wealth. but you don't quite understand how people can use and how roads will get built and how people will use them. I'm willing to cede that point for now, and in the future, we can burn that bridge when we come to it.
After we have all the more important things fixed, we can turn our gaze to the less important things. And that's just reasonable. And you get the important things by prevailing upon your fellow citizens that you've got a better idea. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Right? You go out, you talk to people. I don't want to talk to politicians. I want to talk to regular people. You know, people who will listen, people who will change their minds. It's as if, you know, when I go and I do a formal debate, and this happens often enough, I know for a fact that not one word out of my mouth will register with the guy I'm debating. He will never believe a word I'm saying. I'm not playing for him. I'm playing for the audience. I want the audience to think about what I'm saying and then come to their own conclusions, right? Don't just believe me. Think about it. Their mind's eye can change. The other guy, no, never in a million years. We wouldn't have been paired together if we were going to change our minds in front of a room full of people.
The world speaks in riddles, markets, politics, power, the very nature of consciousness itself. But what if there were guides, a secret fellowship dedicated to reading the signs, to building bridges between the seen and the unseen? The Grey Robes operate in the space others fear or cannot comprehend. We map the territory between spiritual awakening and practical revolution, between ancient wisdom and radical innovation. 12 dimensions guide us. One mission impels us. Find out more at grayrobes.org. That's grayrobes.org. Right. Well, it's funny you say that because we're coming to the close of our couple of hours together. James Harrigan, I want to thank you for joining me today. You are the first and hopefully not the last contestant on this show. And,
thank you, Max. And before you tell me to go away forever, it was my honor to be first. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's my deep pleasure, and we're going to do it again if you'll let me.
I am available to you literally anytime you want.
Excellent. Excellent. Take care of yourself. We'll see you on the flip.
Take care of yourself, Max. And if you're listening out there, for the love of God, be nice to each other. It doesn't take that much. You can do it.
Amen.